Hi, welcome to the 3D pendant. The dragon is coming. I know, I said that last time, and then the video got too long and we just ended up with a bunch of loose parts. Very disappointing. So here is how it all comes together. Let's assemble our dragon. If you missed the part 1 of how to get to this point, the link is in the description. Remember the bias tape I talked about in the beginning? That's what makes the movement possible. Now's the time for it. Bias tape is a piece of fabric cut diagonally to make it super flexible. It's used to finish off edges, that's why it comes pre-folded like this. But we won't need the folds, just a flat bias strip that is bigger than the longer side of our black rectangles, which is about 3 inches. It can be wider than that. We are going to trim it anyway. Let's cut about 20 inches of it and look at how this is going to work. I am planning to iron these rectangles onto the tape with tiny, precisely spaced gaps in between them, which is the hard part. Because if you make the rectangles spread and fuse together, you will ruin the joints. It took a while for me to solve this one. If you just glue it on, it makes the joint brittle. You are welcome to do it differently, but this is how I finally solved it. First, iron out all the previous folding from the tape. And put your ironing board on something to create a step and work over that edge. This will help to keep things straight and keep the previous piece out of the way of the iron. This process is challenging in terms of precision, so take your time. And don't forget to use your cooling tile to get the Teflon to release from the plastic. Now, move that to the edge and fold it out of the way, but keep the gap as small as possible so it goes over the right angle and stays out of the way of the iron. After each addition, check if the joint works before you move to the next segment. Be consistent about it to keep all the joints the same size and as straight as possible. Here we have all 9 of them on. 8 for the body and 1 for the head. Now it's time to play with it to check if it's all stuck on safely. I know you can't see a thing on the black background. Here, in fact, enjoy playing with it. It will never work quite this elegantly again because every next addition will compromise the movement a little bit. But it will look better. Now we will trim it straight and cut it in the middle. Put the fabric sides together and clip it in place. Test if it still moves. And then iron the 2 black long tail parts to the last segment, one side at a time. Trim off the excess fabric and test it again. The tail will be the handle of our dragon, So there is no joint between the slanted part of the tail and the last segment. That part is solid. Time to join things together, which you can do either by just simply melting the edges with your wood burning tool, or if you want things super clean, just micro iron the squares together over a piece of Teflon sheet or parchment. That is a little fussier, but it produces way cleaner and smoother edges. Join only one side of the squares, but both slants of the tail. The slit on the other side of the squares is where the spikes will go, so don't close that yet. Cut up the spikes in units of 2 and clip them in to see if they match the size of the squares and don't get in the way of the joints. If they do, trim them a little. Start joining at the tail side, that way you don't accidentally attach spikes to the first segment. That one doesn't get any because that's where the head will go. Now we will solder the spikes to the squares on both sides. I am still trying to decide which tip is best for this soldering job. So you will see me using different tips throughout this video. You may have to test your tips on scraps to see what will work for you from the ones that came with your tool. Check out the joints again to make sure they all still work. Remember I over-trimmed the head tube a little? Don't do that. But I think this gap will still close as the plastic spreads in the ironing. I can't put a tile on this to release it, so I just rub it with a cold metal tool to remove the Teflon sheet faster. If you still have holes, keep going until you are happy with the surface. This gap will close when I'm attaching the head to the skeleton square. For closing the tail, I will need my forming cone again. And I will stuff it with something, like aluminum foil for example, so it will hold up better to the pressure of the tools. It's a bit flimsy because, remember, it's just your paper pattern covered with tape. Here I'm testing a round tip because I feel the leaf tip makes too much of a flat spot on the side of the round cone shape, especially on the skinny part. For the same reason, I also switched to a round release tool. Now, before we join the two head pieces together, you will have to decide if you want any of the other optional accessories on your dragon head, like teeth and horns and ears and such, because it's a good idea to add those before you join the two head parts together. But for this dragon, I am trying to lighten up the head, so I will skip all that for the moment. We will deal with all those optionals in the last part of this video. For joining the two main head pieces, it is a good idea to test it out first, and then make some registration marks where the parts need to come together. And then just fuse it, either straight up or over a Teflon sheet if you want it cleaner. But under the chin it won't show a whole lot. looks like we are close to the final assembly here. But I know what you're thinking. What about the leg segments? As you may recall, I said I wanted to make the feet textured. Make sure you put them on going in the right direction. The bend of the leg needs to point backwards from the direction of the toes. I will use the little yellow feet as a size guide and work over them. And give him some claws. Dragons need those. And back ones too. There are two options of how you can attach the legs to the body segments. Either you make that 10th black optional rectangle and cut it up lengthwise into 4 strips, and then use that to micro iron the legs onto the segments, like so. But it's a bit fussy and adds more unnecessary weight. So I will use the option number 2 and just glue the legs on this time. Now the dragon is finally ready to come together. Head, 2 neck segments, legs, 2 body segments, legs again, 2 tail segments, and the tail tip. I will start by attaching the head first. Remember that little black dot? That is going to help hold the head in place. And also, this is the part you attach the tongue to if you decide to have one. I strongly recommend to find and mark the middle, because here I didn't, and then I fused it on off-center, which made it hard to get it into the head tube. Fortunately, it still fits, but doing it right the first time saves time. Now I will just fuse the bottom of the head square into that little gap I had there. And that will hold the head in place. If not, you still have enough access to add some more plastic inside with your pen. The next thing that has to be attached is the tip of the tail, because that has to go on while you still can get to it. With any of the segments, you can just reach in with your pen and put a bead of plastic into the tube on either side of the central black square. And if it looks like it's not holding it well enough, organize it a bit with the soldering tool. Once the bottom of the square is attached to the center of the tube, you also seal the top edges of the tube to both sides of the spikes. And then move on to the next segment. As always, test each new addition for ease of movement. And if you find you just put some plastic in the way, snip it off. And keep going till you have all the segments done. Alternatively, you can just glue the parts on, but I don't find that to be any easier. In fact, it takes a bit longer because you need to wait for each segment to dry. And we have a dragon. I have to say, this one, which is the second one I made, moves a lot easier than my first one. Which could be because the head is lighter, or because I paid a lot more attention to not hindering the movement. I tested it after every stage, which I neglected to do the first time around. So, what about the teeth and horns and all the other fun optional parts? Well, that will have to be the last part of the trilogy. So stay tuned, and until then, go and make something.